Number 10 involves a president-elect sneaking through a hostile city in disguise before sunrise. Number 1 involves a bullet that only found its target because it bounced off the president's own car first. In between, 2 pistols that both jammed at point-blank range, a plan to hijack an actual airliner and fly it into the White House, and a shootout on the president's front porch. Every single one of these is real, documented history. Not a movie plot, not an exaggeration, just 10 moments where a bullet, a chair, or a piece of cloth decided whether the country's entire future changed forever. These are the 10 closest calls in American history, ranked from close to way too close. Let's start right at the very bottom of the countdown list. Even a near miss you've never heard of can still almost rewrite the entire Civil War before it starts. February 1861. Abraham Lincoln hasn't even been sworn in yet, 'cause he's still just president-elect, traveling by train toward Washington for his inauguration. Detectives working undercover in Baltimore start picking up chatter about a plot to kill him during a station transfer in the city, and this wasn't some vague rumor picked up secondhand. A detective named Alan Pinkerton had agents actually embedded inside secessionist circles, including one operative, Kate Warren, who spent weeks posing as a Southern sympathizer just to get close enough to hear the planning. Baltimore in 1861 was crawling with people who hated Lincoln before he'd governed a single day, 'cause the city had violent pro-secession gangs openly operating in broad daylight, and 'cause Lincoln's planned route required him to physically walk between 2 train stations on foot, unprotected, in that exact city. That walk looked like the easiest kill shot in the country. Warren herself later claimed she overheard conspirators specifically discussing the timing of that walk, down to which minute the crowd at the station would be thickest, which is basically the exact window a real attack would need. So they didn't take chances. Lincoln got smuggled through Baltimore at around 3:30 in the morning, switched trains a second time under a fake name, and rolled into Washington by 6 a.m., hours ahead of his publicly announced schedule. Meaning one of the most dangerous moments in presidential history happened before the man was even president, and the public didn't fully learn the details of how close it came until years later, 'cause officials at the time deliberately kept the specifics quiet to avoid panicking the country right as it was already splitting apart over secession. "Chief, shh, nobody look at the hat guy. That's the vibe. That's the whole scene." Historians still argue about exactly how organized that plot really was, a fully planned hit, or just a looser, angrier kind of threat. On the flip side, the next guy on this list didn't need a disguise or a secret train route. He just got very, very lucky that 2 guns decided not to work. January 30th, 1835. Andrew Jackson is leaving a funeral at the Capitol when a house painter named Richard Lawrence steps out of the crowd and points a pistol directly at his chest from a few feet away. This is the first assassination attempt on a sitting U.S. president in American history, so Jackson didn't have a playbook, 'cause nobody had written one yet, and 'cause Lawrence was standing close enough that a working gun would have ended everything right there in front of a crowd of mourners. The first pistol flashes and smokes. The powder actually ignites, but the ball itself doesn't fire, which is basically the 1830s version of a gun jamming at the worst possible second. Lawrence doesn't run. He pulls a second loaded pistol, and that one misfires too. 2 guns, 2 failures, at point-blank range, back to back. And Jackson, elderly, sick, using a cane to walk most days, doesn't take cover. He charges the guy, cane raised, hollering the whole way, going straight at his own attacker while aides scramble to pull Lawrence off him. "Chief, I feel like I should be scared right now, but honestly, I did not have 70-year-old president beats his own assassin with a walking stick on my bingo card. That's a whole bald eagle scream right there. Nugget didn't even wake up for this one, and Nugget wakes up for everything. This is the softest entry on the whole list because the next guy up didn't need a misfire. He needed an entire airport, an entire airplane, and a plan insane enough to make Jackson's assassin look reasonable by comparison. February 22, 1974. A man named Samuel Bike walks into Baltimore Washington Airport with a plan that sounds more like a modern nightmare than a piece of 1970s history. He wants to hijack a commercial jet, force the pilots to get it airborne, and fly it directly into the White House while Richard Nixon is inside, basically turning an airliner into a guided missile, decades before that kind of plot had a name people recognized. And this wasn't some vague fantasy Bike cooked up in his head and never acted on, because he'd already mailed out a taped explanation of the plan before he even left for the airport. And because he genuinely believed the pilots would follow his instructions once he had a gun on them. On that tape, in his own recorded voice, he laid out exactly what he intended to do. He hoped to, quote, try to steer the plane into the target, which is the White House. Nixon, according to reporting from that day, was reportedly inside the building at the time. Buck had spent months stewing over this plan because he'd been rejected from a federal small business loan program and had increasingly started blaming the presidency itself for his own personal failures, which is a fancy way of saying a private grievance turned into a plot against the highest office in the country. Buck shot his way onto the plane, killed a police officer trying to stop him, and demanded the pilots take off immediately, even threatening to shoot a passenger every 30 seconds if they refused. But the jet never actually left the gate, because ground crews scrambled to block it, and the plan physically couldn't move fast enough to get airborne. Bick died in a gun battle with police before he ever reached the runway. Chief, an airliner as a missile plot, in 1974. Agent Baxter, reporting for duty. That's the kind of thing that makes you check the news date twice. As wild as that sounds, the next attack didn't just threaten a plane, it got physically close enough to touch. September 5, 1975. Gerald Ford is walking through Sacramento, working a rope line and shaking hands, when a woman named Lynette Fromme, a devoted follower of Charles Manson, gets dangerously close and raises a pistol at him. This isn't some anonymous crank in the crowd. It's one of the most notorious cult-adjacent figures in the country, standing just a few feet from a sitting president in broad daylight. The gun doesn't fire because agents react almost instantly and because the weapon itself simply fails to discharge in her hand, and Ford, because presidents in the 70s apparently just did this, goes right back to work and speaks to the California legislature that same day like nothing happened. Because aides later said he insisted the schedule not change, worried that altering it would look like the country's government could be rattled by one failed attack. Here's the twist though. This wasn't Ford's only close call that month. It wasn't even his scariest one. Chief, which is honestly great news for me, because I barely made it through Eagle Scout training, let alone dodging an actual assassination attempt and then just going to a legislative session afterward. Kinda like Fromme, 17 days later, another woman tried the exact same thing in the exact same state, except this time, the gun actually fired. Fromme herself was arrested on the spot, still holding the weapon, and later served decades in prison before eventually being paroled. One of the last living direct connections to the Manson family, still walking free by the time she got out. September 22, 1975. Ford is leaving the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco when a woman named Sarah Jane Moore raises a pistol and fires. Unlike Fromme's gun 17 days earlier, this one works. The shot actually leaves the barrel and heads toward the crowd around the president. But a former Marine named Oliver Sipple, standing nearby, grabs her arm the instant she pulls the trigger, 'cause he spots the gun coming up before almost anyone else in the crowd does, and 'cause that split-second grab is enough to throw her aim off and send the bullet into a nearby wall instead of toward Ford. Moore tries to fire again. She's stopped before she can. So in the span of just 17 days, Gerald Ford survives 2 separate assassination attempts in 2 different cities from 2 different attackers, and one of them only failed because a random bystander in the crowd made a faster decision than the security detail did. Chief, we've got to talk about Ford's September, 'cause that's not bad luck. That's a full-on curse. 17 days, same state, 2 different women, 2 different guns. Presidents keep getting saved by pure crowd chaos in this list. But the next one on our countdown wasn't saved by the crowd. Somebody standing right next to him wasn't so lucky. Moore, it turned out, had been in contact with the FBI as an informant before the shooting, 'cause she'd been embedded in radical political circles and was reporting back on them, meaning one of Ford's would-be assassins had, at one point, technically been working for the same government she then tried to kill its president. She was sentenced to life in prison and eventually released decades later, expressing regret for what she'd done. February 15, 1933. Franklin Roosevelt, still just president-elect at this point, is speaking from an open car in Miami's Bayfront Park when a man named Giuseppe Zangara opens fire into the crowd. Zangara fires multiple shots toward the car, 'cause he's standing on a wobbly folding chair to get a clear angle over the crowd in front of him, and 'cause that chair shifts at the exact moment he fires, throwing his aim off just enough to change the entire outcome. Roosevelt is untouched, but Chicago's mayor, Anton Cermak, standing near him, is hit and mortally wounded, along with several bystanders standing closest to him in the crowd. Zangara, an unemployed bricklayer who'd immigrated from Italy, had reportedly told police he blamed presidents in general for his own chronic stomach pain, 'cause he genuinely believed capitalism itself had physically made him sick, which is basically one of the strangest stated motives on this entire list. One of the most famous presidential near misses in American history ends with a major city's mayor dying in the president-elect's place instead. Roosevelt's calm in the chaos afterward, he reportedly kept Cermak's head steady on the ride to the hospital, became part of his early public image as the guy who doesn't flinch under pressure. Some historians have even argued Cermak might have been the real target all along, not Roosevelt. The record's genuinely split, so take that one with a grain of salt. Chief, that's dark, but that's history really said hold my beer. That's the tonal exhale we needed a minute ago, and we're right back into the deep end after this one. Compare that public square chaos to what happened 70-some years later, when the danger wasn't a crowd at all. It was a single object thrown from close range, wrapped in cloth. May 10, 2005. George W. Bush is speaking in Freedom Square in Tbilisi, Georgia, standing next to that country's president, when someone in the crowd throws a live grenade toward the stage. It lands somewhere between 60 and 100 feet from the podium, depending on which official account you read, 'cause different agencies measured the distance slightly differently, and 'cause in the moment, most of the security detail on stage didn't even realize how serious it was. The only reason it didn't detonate is almost absurd. The grenade was wrapped in a red handkerchief, and that cloth jammed the firing mechanism just enough to keep it from going off, which is basically a homemade safety switch that ended up backfiring on the guy who threw it. Investigators later confirmed it as fully live, not a dud, not a prop, which means a sitting US president survived an assassination attempt on foreign soil because of a red pocket square. The man responsible, Vladimir Arutyunian, was caught and later convicted after a manhunt, and investigators determined he'd acted alone, 'cause there was no wider conspiracy behind the attack. Just one man, one grenade, and one scrap of fabric that happened to save 2 heads of state at once. Chief, real quick, if you've made it this far into the countdown, you might as well go ahead and hit subscribe right now, 'cause Bush survived because of a handkerchief, and you can survive missing this channel's next video by just tapping the button below. Bush was saved by a mechanism that failed at the worst time for the attacker. The next president on our list wasn't saved by a failed device at all. He was saved because the danger showed up at his own front door, and somebody was standing there to meet it. November 1st, 1950. Harry Truman is staying at Blair House, not the White House, because the White House itself was mid-reconstruction at the time, gutted down to its outer walls and structurally unsafe to actually live in. Two Puerto Rican nationalists, Oscar Collazo and Griselio Torresola, walk up to the front entrance of Blair House in the middle of the afternoon and, okay, that's way too close, guys, open fire directly at the building. A full shootout erupts right there on the steps, cause Truman's security detail is stationed at the door in broad daylight, and cause the attackers are trying to shoot their way through the entrance rather than sneaking in unnoticed. Truman, upstairs at the time, reportedly moves toward a window to see what's happening before being pulled back and told to take cover immediately. A White House police officer named Leslie Caufelt is shot multiple times and mortally wounded during the gunfight, but before he goes down, he still manages to fire back and kill Torresola. Caufelt dies later that same day from his wounds, and to this day he remains the only Secret Service or White House police officer ever killed protecting a president during an actual assassination attempt. His name is still read aloud every year at a Secret Service memorial ceremony. In the aftermath, the entire Blair House security setup was overhauled, cause officials realized a single stationed guard post at street level simply wasn't enough protection for a residence that visible and that exposed. Chief, a shootout on the actual front steps of the president's house, in the middle of the day, with the president upstairs the entire time. That's not a near miss from a distance, that's the front door. As close as that got, the next guy on our list didn't just get close, he got hit. And kept talking anyway. October 14, 1912. Theodore Roosevelt, no longer president, but running for a comeback term as a third-party candidate, is heading to give a campaign speech in Milwaukee when a man named John Schrank shoots him from just a few feet away. The bullet punches through Roosevelt's thick overcoat, through a metal eyeglasses case in his breast pocket, and through his folded 50-page speech manuscript before finally lodging in his chest, cause all three of those objects happen to be stacked in exactly the right spot, and cause that combination is basically the only reason the wound isn't immediately fatal. Roosevelt checks his own mouth for blood to judge whether the bullet punctured a lung. Seeing none, he refuses to go to the hospital. He goes straight to the auditorium instead, and opens with one of the most quietly unhinged lines in presidential history. I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose. He keeps going for almost another hour with a live bullet in his chest, telling the crowd, "The bullet is in me now, so that I cannot make a very long speech, but I will try my best." Doctors ultimately decide it's safer to leave the bullet in his body permanently than to try removing it, and he carries it for the rest of his life, cause the surgery to remove it was considered riskier than just leaving it lodged in the muscle. Schrank, his shooter, was declared legally insane and institutionalized for the remaining 30-some years of his life, cause he reportedly told police he'd been visited in a dream by a previous assassinated president warning him about a third term, which is basically the strangest stated motive on this entire list, Zangara's stomach pain included. Chief, I did not have man gets shot, checks for blood, then gives a full campaign speech anyway, on my bingo card, but here we are. Some presidents on this list got saved by luck. Roosevelt basically got saved by his own pocket, but the last one on our countdown wasn't saved by paper, or misfires, or a handkerchief. He was saved by the worst possible piece of bad luck somehow working out in his favor. March 30th, 1981. Ronald Reagan has just finished speaking at the Washington Hilton and is walking toward his car when a man named John Hinckley Jr. fires 6 shots in under 2 seconds from the crowd of reporters and onlookers. Reagan isn't hit by a clean, direct shot to the chest. One of Hinckley's bullets ricochets off the armored limousine itself and enters under Reagan's left arm, cause the car's armor deflects the round at a strange angle instead of stopping it outright, and cause that ricochet sends it into one of the only gaps the vehicle's protection was never designed to cover. Press Secretary James Brady is shot in the head. No, Jim, no, and critically wounded. Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy and D.C. police officer Thomas Delahanty are also hit, both while actively trying to shield the president. Reagan himself doesn't immediately realize how bad it is, because the entry wound is small and he initially assumes he's just been bruised or had a rib cracked from being shoved into the car so fast, until he starts coughing up blood on the way to the hospital and everyone in the car realizes this is far worse than anyone thought. Once doctors understand the severity, the bullet had come within an inch of his heart. He's rushed into emergency surgery. Even in that state, Reagan reportedly tells the surgical team, "Getting shot hurts," and reportedly joked to his wife that he forgot to duck. Hinckley, it later came out during his trial, had no political grievance against Reagan at all. He'd become fixated on an actress after watching her in a film dozens of times, and became convinced that shooting a president was the way to get her attention, which is one of the strangest and most unsettling motives on this entire list. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity and spent decades in psychiatric custody afterward. He's back at the White House in 12 days, 'cause he'd lost roughly half his blood volume by the time surgeons got the bullet out, and still walked back into the building under his own power less than 2 weeks later. Out of every entry on this list, this is the one where a sitting president was actually struck by gunfire meant for him, seriously enough to require immediate surgery, while multiple other people around him were hit in that same 2 seconds. Brady, despite his injuries, survived and spent the rest of his life as one of the country's most prominent advocates for gun control legislation, 'cause the shooting that nearly killed him ended up reshaping American gun policy debates for decades afterward. Chief. That's the whole list. That's the closest call in the history of the American presidency, and it happened because of a piece of metal bouncing off a car door at exactly the wrong angle. So there they are. 10 times American history came apart at the seams and somehow stitched itself back together anyway. A misfire here, a wrapped handkerchief there. A folded speech that happened to be in exactly the right pocket at exactly the right moment. If there's one thread running through every single entry on this list, it's this. Presidents don't get saved by perfect security systems. They get saved by inches, dumb luck, and total strangers making split-second calls nobody trained them for. And speaking of strangers making split-second calls, that's basically the entire plot of our next video. Every presidential near-miss explained, where we go even deeper into the bodyguards, the bystanders, and the pure chance that's kept this country's leaders alive more often than it probably should have. Click that one next. Chief's already got the popcorn ready, and Nugget's already asleep on the remote again, as usual. That's a whole bald eagle scream right there. See you in the next one. So...